Fine. Perfect. Let's start. We are not streaming publicly online. This discussion is limited only to participants who joined directly after registration. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Denis to share his initial thesis with us. So Denis, please, let's start.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for this introduction. I would like to share with you what I prepared for this initial intervention from my side. I hope that you can see this. So as we all know, we are now in the middle of very tough debates and in general, let's say, creative thinking about what to do next for the associated countries in order to help them not only to obtain the candidate status, but also to advance to the full membership. But of course, today's conversation is more about how to make this important step, leap forward from being just an associated country into moving to a, let's say, more privileged status of candidate country, which of course has its benefits when it comes to having support from the EU. So I don't have many slides, but I would like to really share with you some initial theses that will really help maybe shape the conversation. But you're welcome to add new talking points to what I'm going to present right now. So as we all are aware, we have now this new conversation about the enlargement of the EU to the east, primarily because of this geopolitical critical juncture. So many things are changing fastly. It is very hard right now to really tell when and how some geopolitical events will end and how they are going to end and which will be the outcomes. But we can already see some changes in terms of the relationship of the EU with the region. So what I call this a new enlargement dilemma. And what I have noticed from the discourses which are conveyed by the EU officials, but also by the members or the representatives of the national governments of the EU, we are really talking about not only about the Copenhagen criteria, which were very, which are still necessary and they are part of the enlargement process, but also about the security issues and how to actually guarantee to the countries that are both candidate state, but also others who would like to become to be part of this category, how to ensure the security. And in this regard, we really should look at the Article 42.7, which speaks about solidarity in terms of security. And it reminds to some extent the Article 5 of NATO. But of course, the EU is not a military bloc, and therefore the solidarity in the field of security has a little bit different nuances. But still, I think that now we are really merging the two elements of rule of law and other criteria that are important in terms of being compatible with the EU membership status, and as well how to secure or how to ensure the security of the European Union and the regions that are aspiring to become part of the EU family. The second aspect, obviously, it is somehow linked to the first one, and it is the most important is about the Russian aggression against Ukraine and how this became a game changer at the level of domestic discussions within Ukraine, but also other countries that followed Ukraine's lead in terms of stepping up their ambitions about obtaining the EU membership status, as well as in the EU and in the member states. So both in the neighborhood and in the most advanced and EU aspiring countries in the Eastern Partnership, as well as in the public, in the European public, we have a clear interest for the enlargement that should include Ukraine, but also Moldova and Georgia. We know that Ukraine is a priority in many countries in the EU, but also we have clear advocates of not letting Moldova and Georgia being too behind or even left somehow outside of this process. So we need to reflect how to make this very difficult and tough decisions about making Ukraine EU member state, but also helping the other two to actually be part of the same process. Then another important aspect is, of course, how to make compatible the advancement of the Western Balkans and the discussions about helping Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia to join the EU, and first of all to become the candidate states. Because I believe that, and here I give an example, that we are going to have a tough competition, maybe to some extent, when it comes to the access to the EU funds and other technical assistance, which is provided to those countries that are already enlisted as future members of the EU. And this should be really taken into account. We cannot avoid that there is a competition, and this competition should be somehow maybe should be eased through dialogue and really clarifications of how the one process of integrating Western Balkans doesn't really compete and conflict with the enlarging the EU towards Eastern Partnership countries that are interested in this objective. And last but not least, we are always going to be talking what we are doing with the Eastern Partnership as a dimension of the EU that is trying to somehow keep the European integration as part of the regional conversation and as part of the regional decision-making process and policy-making processes. So we are going to probably talk about the multi-speed Eastern Partnership, which would be definitely about concentric circles, or why not about fragmentation of the Eastern Partnership in at least two groups, if not three or four, given the particularities of the relations that the EU has developed and is developing with each of the 6 member countries that are part of this dimension. The next slide is a kind of what would be the life after the EU candidate status. And of course, I cannot avoid the conversation about the current stage, which is already passed by all 3 countries. All 3 of them have handed over to the EU the second part of the questionnaire, so which means that this stage, at least at the level of the completing the questionnaires, is already done. But that also showed what we could do better and where we could probably improve the entire exercise. As you can read from the slide, I believe that Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova, they showed different somehow performances, and while Georgia was quite open to publish the questionnaire, Moldova didn't do that, but it involved the civil society, while not really accepting the opposition, which is pro-Russian in Moldova, but still probably it should be part of the debate and this very existential conversation about what is the future of the country. And Ukraine, which is at war, and it involved the civil society organization, but it was not as transparent as probably it would have been if not the war that Russia unleashed against the neighbor of Moldova and neighbor of the EU. The second aspect is about the candidate status. I think that we are going to have positive results, at least for Ukraine in June. This was already promised by various EU officials, including leaders of EU member states. But we need to really see what will be happening after June summit in Brussels. Will we have like a direct conversation or a straightforward conversation about opening the negotiations with Ukraine and the others if they follow, or there will be some preconditions for opening the negotiations on the chapters that are somehow important and essential for actually advancing toward the EU membership status. And last but not least is about the nationwide conversation and transparency, which is somehow linked to the first point. I believe that, and this is something which sometimes doesn't really come easy for some politicians or practitioners, but we need to take into account that we have different segments of the population, and we need to ensure that the process is as organic as possible and is as inclusive as it can be done. And this, of course, involves dialogue with the public, and including those who are opposing the EU and making or converting them to the EU idea in enlargement. And before moving to the remarks of our speakers, I would like to end my presentation with these questions that I believe they could answer, and I'm sure they are going to touch on several points, or maybe all of them. So here are 5 questions that I would like to raise together with you. So what are the priorities in the pre and post candidate, EU candidate decisions? How to combine the state of security emergency and priority with the need for reforms in these countries, while we are really talking about making this leap forward from the candidate status to something more. Which are the key drivers, and what are the transparency measures to make it transparent and inclusive, the whole process? And last but not least, what to do with the Russian factor while we are trying to progress from one stage to another. And here I will end my conversation, and I will give the floor to Tomas to moderate it further. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Denis. Thank you for your introductory remarks. I guess all these questions you ended with are very good starting points for our discussions. But I would like to invite Kerry just to start with remarks and comments, not only on what we saw on Denis' presentation, but also in some broader perspectives. Just some ideas. What do you see right now as priorities or maybe challenges on this accession process?
Great, thank you very much. I'm trying to share my screen, but it's not letting me, but I can pass the PowerPoints on afterwards because they're just notes really. Well, I think unsurprisingly, my views and thoughts and expectations gel quite nicely with what Denis just said. And I also would refer to this idea of enlargement being between longing or political desire, but also realism or kind of pragmatic approach as well. But I think if I look back and reflect upon the previous enlargements in the 2000s, in the 1980s as well, I think there was always this element of political desire, normative expectation, and at the same time the need for hardcore bureaucratic or kind of economic realism and pragmatism. So I think in your work on the future of enlargement, I think it'd be very handy not to lose sight of those previous enlargement processes, because they were controversial and they were contested, and there was far from a consensus within the EU or amongst the candidates for actually enlarging how and when it did. However, I'm also conscious that the last 2 months have seen this prospect of a future enlargement come around very quickly at lightning speed. And so I think at this moment in time, we are assuming that candidacy status is only really a matter of time, the end of this year, if not before, or certainly the beginning of 2023. So that's my basic assumption, that candidate status is just a matter of time. I want to refer really to the Copenhagen Criteria, which still form the pillar or the main factor underlying any enlargement process. And I'm going to refer to some degree to a project that I was involved in last year, which was the Eastern Partnership Civil Society Index, which I kind of oversaw and did the editing-in-chief role for, which was a really fascinating process. And although it happened before the war, I think there are still important indicators that we can draw from that. Obviously, when we look at the Copenhagen criteria in their entirety, for me, there are 2 particular criteria that stand out as being the most relevant and the most difficult for all of the associated trio to actually deal with. And these are the first one to do with having or whether they have stable democratic institutions. And the other most important Copenhagen criteria would be that one relating to their ability to take on the obligations of membership. Of course, the other criteria to do with market economy, the EU's own absorption capacity are very important too. But when it comes down to it, I think democratic institutions and the ability to take on membership obligations are the 2 most critical ones, and will be the linchpins, if you like, of whether this candidate status comes around sooner rather than later. And this is where the heavy problems really lie. Now, what the results of the index showed, and I still think they're very relevant, is that there are lots of, in the associated trio, there are lots of gaps in terms of their declarations of adherence or compliance with the Copenhagen criteria and the reality on the ground. And this is obviously no surprise for any of us, but I think it's worth remembering, and that there's this great inconsistency in terms of implementation. We have plenty of instances of short notice changes in electoral policies. We see plenty of instances where OSCE and Venice Commission recommendations are only partially implemented, and we have to pay attention to those and not lose sight of those. There are also plenty of examples where central election committees, which are core for democratic elections, are really underfunded or hardly play a role at all. And these are the kind of nitty-gritty of issues that I think we have to pay attention to when we're thinking about the prospect of candidate status. The second one would be to do with human rights protections. Again, this is an area where most of the associated trio have rhetorical adherence to, but in reality, human rights protections are often very patchily applied. And we saw over the past few years, lots of new barriers or restrictions on freedom of speech or assembly, especially in Georgia, actually, over the last couple of years or so. There's also a lack of regulation with regards to hate speech. And these are all important in relation to these, core Copenhagen criteria. We also observe plenty of instances of very weak parliamentary scrutiny. And this is going to be really important if these countries are going to move into the accession phase. You need to have strong parliaments that are able to debate, understand, and scrutinize this, this tsunami of legislation which is going to come in the accession process. On the question of the rule of law, which of course is a really amorphous, big area, I think it's important to highlight where the priority problems and the key problems and the priority areas are. Namely, it all boils down to, I think, in all three countries, the independence or the lack of independence of the judiciary. I think another area where all countries suffer or haven't performed very well is that in the area of non-discrimination and exclusion of vulnerable groups, and on the basis of gender in particular. This might not seem very important in the geopolitical context right now, but arguably it is, and we shouldn't lose sight of the importance of anti-discrimination laws, gender, LGBTQI, etc., etc. I haven't mentioned corruption and state capture because there's so much to say in that area as a systemic problem, but there are plenty of instances where reform could be addressed in little kind of niche areas which would really advance the tackling of rule of law problems. For example, protecting whistleblowers who in ordinary circumstances would be able to chip away at corrupt practices, but there's a lack of regulation to protect whistleblowers in most, if not all, associated trio countries. The second Copenhagen criteria, which is another important area, I think, to focus discussion on, is, as I mentioned already, the trio's ability to take on the obligations of membership. It's to do with institution, governance, capacities to really deal with the onslaught of the acquis communautaire, which they've done pretty well under the Eastern Partnership with so far. However, I think where the lacking areas or the problematic areas lie, which need to be addressed, are to do with, which are going to be really important when it comes to accession and building upon candidacy. And that is because in the vast majority of cases, the public administrations and civil service sectors in these countries are in high need of reform. There's been kind of piecemeal jumps forwards and backwards in terms of the professionalization of public administrations. But certainly our research over that year period with the index showed that public administrations are in need of really fundamental reform, depoliticizing in many cases, And they also need to set about recruiting EU technical specialists to be able to deal with the accession process. You know, you can't just have generalists in EU integration, but you need to have people on the ground in these countries who can really deal with the nitty-gritty of accession. In terms of this obligations of membership, the second point I would raise is about the incomplete decentralization and the lack, in many cases, of well-functioning relationships between central and local governments. I know that Ukraine made, you know, once upon a time, very big strides in this direction. I know that Georgia and definitely Moldova are dealing with decentralization methods and improving local government and relations to central government. And in the context of becoming a candidate, that again, I think is very, very important. Finally, I'm just going to refer to a piece of work that Denis and I did. It was only a month ago, a piece in New Eastern Europe, where we focused upon sketching 3 scenarios as to how things might proceed over the coming months. And things have moved so quickly that I think 2 of our scenarios have at least are a bit more questionable. The first scenario we spoke about for next steps was the idea of a rapid fast track, with the idea of the 3 countries being given candidate status already by the end of 2022. Now, writing about that a month ago, I think we both thought that that's not a very likely scenario. I think now it is a more likely scenario. We mentioned the questionnaires already and the returning of the questionnaires. So the idea of a rapid fast track, at least for Ukraine, I think has risen up in our scenarios. The second scenario that we mentioned was the idea of the 3 countries, or at least some of them, falling at the first hurdle. And I think that is actually less likely now, because it seems that the political will from the EU side has remained pretty consistent, and the rapid return of some of the questions to the EU's questionnaire, I think, shows that the possibility of really, you know, falling at the first hurdle and there being another range of problems is actually less likely. The third scenario that we spoke about actually still holds, in my view. I don't know about Denis, but in the third scenario, we argued that a moderate pace towards candidacy is more likely to come about. We see that there's this longing, this political will to realize candidate status sooner rather than later. But at the same time, we argued that we shouldn't get carried away with this political dynamic, but we have to proceed with caution and with attention to the kind of measures in response to the problems I mentioned before, and to, you know, keep in mind that the Copenhagen Criteria are essentially the EU's, you know, brakes to control this process and the speed of the process of gaining candidate status for the 3 countries. There are 4 areas that I would set as my recommendations about next steps and what the countries and what the EU should focus in on, amongst many others, of course. And these might sound very niche, and they might sound a little bit irrelevant given the context of the war, but I think it's important not to lose sight of the detail. And this, again, is a reflection of what we learned from the enlargement in the 2000s. The first one, I would argue, is to help the states, help the 3 states improve their basic administrative capacities to take on the burden of accession. I mentioned technical experts, and I spoke about reforming, professionalizing, depoliticizing public administration at national and regional and local levels as well. Obviously, it's very important to empower or to aid parliaments and CSOs, civil society organizations, to help them really be able to scrutinize and play a full role in accession, and not just being inserted into the process, but really giving them a voice in this process. Being more rigorous on the rule of law questions, well, we've been talking about that for decades, but as I mentioned, I think the time is to hone in on particular dimensions of that, depoliticize and work on creating independent judiciaries. Easier said than done, I know, but that has to be held out, I think, as a priority. Final point, is my particular fascination, let's say, is again not to lose sight of improving the business environment. The business environment links to the rule of law, it links to good governance, but if you have a good business environment, small and medium enterprises and entrepreneurship can really thrive, that it hasn't really done so far. And that's very important, I think, for moving towards candidate status. And that is a direct lesson learned from the 2004 enlargement, for example, to Poland, where I'm sitting right now, where the business environment was prioritized to create a level playing field, which helped entrepreneurs and SMEs, which really helped anchor liberal democracy and the kind of conditions needed for EU membership. I've raced through that very, very quickly, but hopefully you get a sense of my thinking at this current moment in time. Thank you.
Thank you, Kerry. Thank you very much for your detailed, I would say, detailed view on this current situation and potential challenges as well. Sergey, I would like to turn to you and also to ask for your impressions and reactions about what the current process looks like from Kiev, from Ukraine, and maybe especially how do you see this potential decision regarding accession, to say starting point for the accession and the candidate status, which potentially should be given during the summer, I guess, and how this balance between political will, which is right now quite high, and still some persisting formal obligations not to break down every criteria which was so precisely constructed before that during all these previous accession processes. How this balance between political engagement and willingness to support, especially Ukraine, and still willingness to keep on administration process side, how this balance should look like in your view?
Thank you very much, Thomas, and many thanks to organizers for having me here. It's a great pleasure to see you all, although online, but hopefully sooner or later we will be able to assemble offline and discuss already achieved progress in the accession of all three countries. Let me split my comment into three parts. First, I will reflect a little bit on what Denis has already said and comment on his presentation. Then I will also give some Ukrainian perspective, and I will wrap up with a broader context of the processes which are happening in the EU, in Europe right now. So speaking about the Denis presentation and this dilemma between security issues and the process of European integration, for me, it's more or less clear that the EU treaties articles on security simply do not work. And the reflection of that is the case of Finland and Sweden, which are the EU members and which are protected by the EU treaties and can expect the support from the EU in case of emergency, which is emerging, bearing in mind their desire to join NATO. However, despite the existence of the pretty well-defined EU treaties articles, they still have this appetite for more security assurances, and they gained those from the United Kingdom, which is not the EU member after Brexit, but anyway, which is needed for that, which means that they are quite not sure in the strength of the EU treaties. So I mean, it was clear that the EU needs to strengthen its security pillar, and this need is only growing under the current circumstances. And I was also involved in a number of interviews with the Eastern Partnership civil society actors, and before the war, before the February 24, and most of them also highlighted that there is a need for security dimension of the Eastern Partnership. And now I guess we will get a trigger which makes us move faster in this regard and to strengthen the security pillar of the EU neighborhood and of the EU itself. Then I wanted to comment on the quick but not fully inclusive process of filling the questionnaires. I would say that Ukraine was a front runner in this regard because there was a high level of inclusion of civil society organizations, and we were engaged, and I know many of my colleagues who were engaged in filling the questionnaires, which means that the government is absolutely open to civil society comments and suggestions, and sometimes let me put it very frank, sometimes the government was even lacking expertise, and the expertise was provided by civil society actors who were better equipped for answering the questions from the EU. Speaking about the time for the candidacy status sooner or later, I think that it's clear that well, let me share sort of flashback from February 22. On that day, I was supposed to publish a blog in one of the European institutions, civil society organization, think tanks. And in that blog, I've written that the society in Ukraine perceives the world in black and white. And the peer reviewer commented that the author cannot really say if the society perceives the world in black and white. And in 2 days, it was clear that we do. We do perceive it in black and white. And now the society is traumatized even much higher than it was in 2014. And this trauma causes black and white perception. And that's why candidacy is the least that you can do to remain white, because nobody except for the experts will go into nuances and will try to distinguish between 50 shades of European diplomacy. It's either yes or no, and it's very important. Also, I wanted to comment a little bit on Kerry's intervention, in particular with regard to decentralization. I'm absolutely impressed what's going on right now, because I know people who are working on these decentralization programs, and they're still working, I mean, being IDPs and sitting in the villages and connecting via internet and giving seminars on decentralization, which is something absolutely great. I mean, when the country is under the missile shelling and you are giving a seminar on decentralization to local authorities, it's something absolutely unbelievable. And the progress we achieved in this regard is very high. Of course, we need progress in other areas as well. But there is another good point. It was ENTSO-E accession. I mean, in February, we were supposed to have a test when we disconnect from Russia and Belarus and connect to the EU networks, to the EU grid. It was supposed to be test, but we never reconnected to Russia and Belarus. And basically, the test turned out to be such a success that now we are connected to ENTSO-E, which means also that some progress was achieved. A few more points I wanted to add is the Eastern Partnership future. It is also related to Denis' comments. Those of you who were at the conference in Warsaw in December, I guess, might remember my intervention on Eastern Partnership future when I cited the Game of Thrones motto of the House of Greyjoy: "What is dead may never die." So I commented it on Eastern Partnership. Now I have a feeling that well, it is dead. It is basically dead. We can speak about the Eastern Partnership only regarding the support of civil society organizations in the Eastern Partnership, in particular in those countries which are not candidate countries, which are not associated countries. Belarus, Azerbaijan and Armenia, civil society there does need the support, and the Eastern Partnership can be one of the providers of this support. I mean, the structures of Eastern Partnership. But what Moldova, Georgia, and Ukraine need now, and Ukraine in particular, is the access to the instrument of pre-accession assistance. Basically, even those opponents of the EU integration in Ukraine were always referring to the fact that the EU demands from us reforms without providing pre-accession funds. now these opponents will lose the ground, because if the EU provides us with the access to the instrument of pre-accession assistance, it would mean that we'll have not only demands for the reforms, but also resources for the reforms. Of course, there will be a competition, but also granting the status of the candidate may eventually provide with a higher level of foreign direct investments. I mean, it may be the case for Moldova and Georgia first and foremost, because there is low appetite for investing into the country in war. But paradoxically, on the other hand, the fact that a great part of the Ukrainian infrastructure is ruined may also be attractive for the investors, in case the investors know that what are the rules of the game, and that the country will go in compliance with the EU norms and standards, and the investments will be safe. So I think it is really important to have this candidate status sooner than later. And finally, a few more comments on the general context. I think that we should not miss the developments related to the results of the Future of Europe conference and the recommendations provided by the citizens of the EU and the way they will be implemented. I mean, it's very important to know where we move, because the countries of the associated trio are changing, but the EU is changing as well, and we should follow the changes and keep them in mind, and disseminate information about the changes when it gives an additional impetus for the integration. Also, Macron's so-called Macron's initiative is to be discussed and to be kept in mind, because that's a sort of a substitute to the membership, the idea which was voiced by Macron after the conversation with Scholz recently. And well, again, speaking not academically, but rather in a different manner, it feels that what Macron is providing is sort of geopolitical purgatorium. I mean, for those who are not good enough to get to the European paradise, but should not stay in Russian hell, there is sort of purgatorium, which is the sort of political community, like for where Ukrainians and Brexiters should be kept together, unless they prove they deserve to get back to the heaven or finally move to the hell. I don't think that will be acceptable, I mean, for the wider audience, for the electorate, and I don't think that it will be accepted in Central and Eastern Europe as well, which puts under the question the French leadership, despite the ambition of the French presidency and despite of the ambitions of the French president. So I think the idea has to be reconsidered, or at least perceived critically, because of course we should keep in mind also the upcoming elections, parliamentary elections in France, and we should consider the interests and the goals of the French players. But anyway, if you voice such an idea at the EU level, at the global level, you should be cautious, and you should be aware that it might be perceived very critically from the region it tackles. Finally, well, that's the emotional side of it. I mean, neither EU institutions nor EU leaders should keep very cautious on providing the candidate status, because well, candidate status does not necessarily mean accession, but it is a great symbol, and it is also a great tool for the civil societies of the countries, because even less symbolic and even less persuasive argument, which was visa liberalization regime, provided civil society with a great strength, because civil society and think tanks were pushing governments to move forward with the reforms, and this pressure was accompanied with the growing expectations of the citizens of all three countries regarding the visa liberalization. If civil society think tanks have such a tool as candidate status, that would be a great instrument for pushing the governments and for assembling the votes of the ordinary citizens in favor of the reforms. So thank you very much. I will probably stop here and ready for the further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergey. Thank you very much for your remarks. Let's move on. Dorina, what's your view and what's your comments on this process?
Hi, good morning to everyone. I'm very pleased to be here, and thank you for inviting me. So much has been said already. I'm trying to see. I think I'll also maybe structure it in three main messages that I have. One will mirror a little bit the external environment to what Denis presented, and Sergey also touched upon this. A little bit about the internal dynamic of Moldova. And then I think my third point, which I was just being creative this morning and while listening to you, and I'm wondering whether we can be creative, since we had Europe's Day just recently, and Schuman Declaration has a couple of very nice quotations. And I think back in 1950s, one of them, which today I find that is relevant, is that when it comes to peace, looking at the threats that there are, we should be creative in the options that that are given and that are designed. All right, let me look first at the external dynamic. This is something that I work on EU's diplomacy, and indeed there are so many shades of it that we would not have enough time to go over everything. But let me just put an emphasis on the fact that European Union was never designed to be a security actor, at least not in if we conceptualize security in hard terms in this realpolitik. So I think I will second what Sergey mentioned, that when it comes to security, the European Union, the direction that it could embrace, and what we are witnessing now, is this awakening of its role as a security guarantee and guarantor to countries in the post-Soviet space specifically. Many have been arguing that it's actually the war in Ukraine that has also altered radically EU's position on Russia and pushed member states to commit to support membership and European membership perspective for Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. However, my observations will actually be that in the long term, it all depends on EU's political will of providing this security guarantees to its neighbors. But in EU's normative vein, there is only one instrument, which is membership perspective. And of course, you could already witness, and we all have seen the historical intra-EU divide. And here I'll put it very simplistically, of course. We have the Central and Eastern European member states who are pushing for a faster approach, a more anchored approach to today's reality when it comes to the candidate status for these countries. But then on the other hand side, you have countries like the Netherlands, Germany, or even France, if you mentioned Macron's latest proposal, or Spain. They are more reluctant. And the analysis of all their public discourses and proposals is usually to go back to the association agreement purely, basically not necessarily a membership perspective, which countries like Moldova, Ukraine, or Georgia would like. And they are emphasizing, maybe in an objective vein, the long process of deep internal transformations which are needed. What I would like to maybe highlight here is what was the tricky side is when it was discussed in the capitals at different events, you always hear this discussion about the Western Balkans, and there are reservations because of the association process for the Western Balkans, etc., etc. Well, I think if you are committed, European Union as an actor, if you are already saying, yes, we are willing, we have political will, we are willing to provide that guarantees, then a positive message and the best way forward is actually no longer stalling the association process in Western Balkans, right? So this would also mean a push forward to being a little bit more creative of how to offer what's happening after candidate status in for Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. I think one of the questions of Denis were the who is driving and maybe who is dividing this process. Again, externally speaking, we see I think at the beginning of March, we had the group of 11, you know, Poland and Bulgaria and Czech Republic, the Baltics, then we had Croatia, Romania, and even Hungary, who supported this swift candidacy for Ukraine. It is very difficult for these countries to become advocates. So this would be my assessment. If they act out as an intra-EU bloc, I think they can have political weight and create pressure and lobby and advocate, at least by constantly keeping this issue on the agenda and pushing for the European Union to go beyond the bureaucratic process, which is so heavy. But these countries are not necessarily very well perceived. And I think when we think about the enlargement process, it's very important to look at the internal dynamics of the European Union. We have erosion of democracy in Hungary. I think Poland has become a prominent case of deterioration of rule of law. The Czech Republic is not the best seen in Brussels circles, right? Because there are issues with control and manipulation of media, and the role of the security services in the elections were discussed. And then Romania, Hungary, Bulgaria in the EU rule of law report have been criticized. And these countries have not had the best let's say, a portfolio when it came and position when it came to the 2015 refugees crisis. And all of this created certain paths and creates, I would say, rather drawbacks for them to become this intra-EU political weight. And then we know it's always about consensus on top of political will. So the question is, are they ready to commit? And did their position vis-a-vis Russia actually change? I'll leave it at this because I think there is plenty of room for discussion, because I want to now move towards the internal dynamic when it comes to Moldova. And even though this is the country where I was born and raised, unfortunately, Moldova has not managed to make a truly qualitative leap in its evolution. I think the fundamental problems, and Kerry mentioned the Copenhagen Criteria, the same will stand out in European Union reports on Georgia and on Ukraine, that fundamental problems are still existent, and we know how the European Commission works. It will look at that particular reforms, have they been implemented and not, to what degree was the sustainability of those reforms. This is what the process was about. Again, will there be some creativity or not? I have some ideas, but before that, let's look at the EU reports. What do they say about Moldova? Weak institutions, poor governance, vulnerable economy, complete energy dependence, polluted environment, inefficient social protection. Of course, EU reports are a little bit more diplomatic. If you look at civil society reports in Moldova, they say it a little bit more straightforward. The key chapters, justice sector reform has generally stagnated, and then corruption is a major dysfunction in governance over the past 3 decades for Moldova. So these dysfunctionalities in many respects will be things which will be evaluated, and it will be asked, did Moldova do its homework or not when it comes to democratic institutions, rule of law, and a stable economy? And to these issues, let's stop the 2 vulnerabilities. It's the Transnistrian separatist region. I don't need to go into details because we are all aware of what's going on there. And then the energy dependence on Russia. And I think here, several of the questions that for reflection that Denis asked us to refer to, I would say when it comes to Moldova, I was surprised, not in a positive sense, that there is no communication on what is the action plan. What is the action plan? What is the risk governance framework for Republic of Moldova, and how does it look and strategize when it comes to Transnistria and when it comes to energy dependence? I was also, in that sense, questioning why there are no investments in public diplomacy, meaning not only discussing in closed doors with certain actors in civil society or society broadly speaking, but with everyone. Why not communicate? I understand that there are so many issues and sensitivities to deal with, but for me, these are plans that had to be in place before the war. So not to be reactive. And of course, chapeau to what Moldova has been doing when it comes to the matter of humanitarian crisis and refugees. But having a separatist region, having Russian soldiers, having one of the largest ammunition depot in Eastern Europe also in that region, should be on the top of the agenda of Moldova. I'm mentioning this and I'm putting emphasis on this because this is something that European Union will look into, and this will be a discord among member states. What do we do with countries like Moldova, like Georgia, where we have these frozen conflicts? And now on top of that, in Ukraine, we also know that there is, due to Russia's or Putin's appetite, put it like that, there is this direction towards creating, let's say, mini conflict regions and separatist republic within an independent state. To sum up, I would like to move towards certain ideas, maybe a little bit of creative thinking that to be able to maintain peace and move towards this European integration agenda, some creative efforts need to be in place, proportionate with the threats that are in the region of the associated trios. And I think the first one that I'm thinking of is related maybe more towards Republic of Moldova, and I'm wondering whether in Ukraine and Georgia that would be a similar idea. How much have these countries learned from the Western Balkans? I can only look at Moldova right now and say, I would not say that much. Also looking at the bilateral relation between Moldova and Serbia. So if we look back on the Serbian case, when they received the questionnaire, it was about 3 years before, I think it was in 2007. So yeah, it was 3 years in advance that they set up an interinstitutional platform. And I think it had over 25 or even 30 working groups according to the different chapters which were to be indicated in the questionnaire. So if to derive from that, the straightforward creativity would be that this type of joint working groups or task force, if you want, of specialized diplomats, civil servants, the Moldovan academic community. Moldova also has a huge diaspora and a human capital with expertise. From the 42% of population which are abroad, 25 are highly skilled migrants, and these are migrants with which Moldova does not necessarily have a framework to engage them. So I think also together with civil society actors internally, this is a way to pool resources and competent expertise not only to generate information for the questionnaire or to how to answer to the European Union, but to generate ideas of how to tackle the vulnerabilities that the country has, and also how to design a risk governance framework for a country like Moldova. I do think in our discussions with Denis, we were saying that actually the questionnaire could be a useful catalyst for a national platform in Moldova where different voices could come together, but unfortunately this hasn't been done. And I also would like to emphasize, and which I do not see happening internally in Moldova, and a transparent discussion with society at large to give an understanding that when a country is ready, it does become an official candidate for accession, but that does not necessarily mean that official negotiations will be opened. So I have noticed that sometimes certain misinformation is being given, and I think that's not really what Moldova right now should be going for. Now, on the external dimension, and with this I will end, I would like to point a creative thinking that has been there within the European Union, different circles, some time ago, and this was the two-speed Europe. And I think, Denis, you questioned, or one of the reflection points was this multi-speed Eastern Partnership. I will agree with Sergei that to different extents, Eastern Partnership is dead. But at the same time, it is an instrument, and how the European Union wants to redesign should be on the table right here, right now. So to come back to the idea of the two-speed Europe, this perspective was splitting member states into camps, if you wish, according to their relative power, their ability to implement necessary reforms, as well as to their geographic position. And I think in this approach remained quite vague. It wasn't really embraced, but it would be a good idea to come back to it in order to couple it to this multi-speed Eastern Partnership that you have mentioned, Denis. So I think to a certain extent, this is already in place, this two-speed Europe. Not all member states are part of Eurozone, right? Not all member states are part of Schengen area. I mentioned earlier the democratic governance issues that Central and Eastern European member states are dealing with. So probably we don't have a two-tier system of right now, but maybe multiple Europe at different speeds. So if we think from this perspective and now link it to enlargement, there could be a different tier system of enlargement for countries like Ukraine, for countries like Moldova, like Georgia, that would find it easier to navigate the web of bureaucratic as well as economic and geopolitical hurdles that have been, coming together throughout the decades. But as realistically speaking, such a proposal will never be to the liking of countries like Germany or France or Netherlands, which we know carry quite a political weight. Okay, I will stop here and leave room for questions and discussions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorina. Thank you for your comments, especially on Moldova's case and some challenges laying ahead of this process. Vano, what Georgia looks like this stage of the candidacy status. So what is your opinion, how we will proceed with this candidate status? And especially what is interesting for me, I heard some also opinion that, Georgia and Moldova are trying just to catch up with Ukraine and to use this political opportunity, maybe just getting on the back of Ukraine. And for some in European capitals, there's also at least some doubts regarding whether Georgia and Moldova could remain, or to say could use this political opportunity together with Ukraine, or should be separated in at least some administrative procedures from Ukraine, because situation when the war is going on in Ukraine and to say some more peaceful time in Moldova and Georgia requires a bit different attitudes and different procedures. So if you could also elaborate on this perspective, I would be thankful as well. So please, Vano.
Thank you, Thomas. I'll try to answer that question as well in my intervention, and I'll try to be as short as possible and as sharp as possible, and trying to give the answers to some of the questions which are hovering here and there. So first and foremost, I think that I would divide this my intervention into four parts. The first part would be about the moment of truth, and now actually we are at the moment of truth. This is a moment of truth for the European Union, and this is a moment of truth for Georgia. And of course, I will speak from the Georgian perspective. I think that the moment of truth for the European Union is that it has to give the answer to very long-standing questions, which has been here at least since the Rose Revolution, whether the European Union is ready to accept Georgia as a member in a medium or long run. And we have been asking for that question for quite a while, and unfortunately we didn't really hear a clear answer to that. So now this is a moment of truth to get that answer at this stage. The second answer is pretty much linked to what I was saying, we have to hear whether European Union is just an elite club or this is a club for everyone. And there is equality matters and there is a fairness matters in this process. And the third moment of truth for the European Union is that whether the Article 49 is alive or it's a standstill clause. So that's what we have to see, whether it's really and it's real, or it's just there for being nicely written. When it comes to the moment of truth for Georgia, this is a moment of truth whether Georgia is ready to carry out those really very in-depth reforms when it comes to the judiciary, when it comes to the reforming the law enforcement structures, when it comes to the reforming the legislation and the practice when it comes to the human rights. It was mentioned the freedom of expression by one of the speakers. So whether we are ready to really dedicate for these reforms, which is needed to join the European Union, or this is just the lip service which we have been hearing for quite a while. My second part is that this is a time of the wake up, and this is a time of wake up for the European Union first and foremost, because and unfortunately it took years and it took a lot of casualties. It took butchers for the European Union to wake up, and that's really sad that for such a huge sacrifice and for such a price, Ukraine first and foremost managed to wake them up. And again, I will try to answer your questions. This is largely because of Ukraine that this window of opportunity is open now, and all these three countries we are looking at each other. Who would be the first to dare to submit the application for membership? So it was Ukraine, and it was followed by Georgia and Moldova, of course. If it were Moldova, I'm sure that it would have been followed by Moldova, by Ukraine and Georgia. But now it was the time for Ukraine. Ukraine made it, so it's followed by Georgians and by Moldovans. So when it comes to another issue which is linked about this wake up, unfortunately, Georgia went through this process some years ago in 2008, and we were pretty much disappointed after the war because we saw that European Union went back to Russia to the business as usual very soon, basically months after this war, and it was a biggest disappointment for us. And we here very much hope that it won't be business as usual, because as it seems the war continues there, it seems that there is, unfortunately, again, there is no end in the nearest future of that war. And I believe that European Union, and especially some of the member states, should not get accustomed to this reality. They should not consider that, you know, it's okay that there is a war between Russia and Ukraine. It can continue as long as possible. So there is a time for real movement and real steps. Now about the expectations when it comes to the June European Council summit. As it seems, it's very much the political decision. It's not about the technicalities. You know, there's no country, and this is kind of imaginary to answer all these questions in a very in-depth manner in 1 or 2 months. I mean, it also demonstrates that it is very much political process, and not kind of, you know, nitty-gritty issues. The first of the expectations is that the European Union does not repeat the mistake of NATO back in 2008, when NATO actually made the decision, which was not understandable for anyone but Russia, and it gave a signal to Russia to, you know, to act freely. So that mistake should not be repeated, and that lesson should be learned. When it comes to the expectations here in Georgia, nobody at all in this country expects anything more than Ukraine, because we fully understand that if there is a morality, if there is a fairness, Ukraine should get as much as possible from the European Union. But at the same time, nobody here in Georgia expects that there will be a split between Ukraine and Georgia, because that split might be understandable, might be understood by Russia in a very different way. That would be like, okay, we are embracing Ukraine, but we are not embracing Georgia or Moldova. And all the more, that decision might be very much taken and capitalized by anti-Western forces here in the country, and they will tell me, my colleagues, that basically if Georgia wants to move further, there should be the war, and the candidate status requires the war with Russia. So that will be very, very difficult to interpret for my colleagues to the local audiences here. But at the same time, what is expected and what the civil society has been asking for, that this candidate status should be accompanied with the conditionality. Because that conditionality is something, and it was mentioned by Sergiy, visa liberalization action plan, and that was very much same here, because the visa liberalization action plan conditionality worked very well, and some of the, I would say, painful and not very popular reforms, not very popular laws, say anti-discrimination law, was passed largely because there was this conditionality, and it really worked. But these conditionalities should be as clear as possible, and as even say the time frame as possible. It should be written in a very operational manner, not like, you know, just a general statement, which would be very difficult to measure, and it would be very good. And the civil society would say that something is not fully done, and the government would say that everything is done. So it should be, and the European Union would make some kind of, you know, writing the reports in between. So that would be a very, I mean, I would say it would be excellent to have this very clear benchmarks. I'm afraid to say that we are hearing that some of the member states are putting this process and linking it to the Western Balkans. It was said already that this should not be kind of any linkage to this process, because if these countries are there, they don't take the places of the Western Balkans. They have their own way, and Georgia, Ukraine, and Moldova on their way have their own way to the European Union. So basically, not using this as a promoting this national interests, you know, in first and the foremost, but rather having this like solidarity and joint vision. So, and the last point about the Eastern Partnership that Denis nicely mentioned in his presentation. I'm afraid to say this, but Eastern Partnership is pretty much over, and it needs a absolutely different approach, because if we look at the multilateral track, it doesn't really work. I mean, unfortunately, the Georgian authorities and the Ukrainian authorities have this exchange, not very nice, to put it mildly. There is no much interaction between Moldova and Georgia, and I keep on saying this every time that demonstration of this low level of cooperation is that Moldova has no embassy in Tbilisi, and that, I think, tells a lot in this process. Basically, we see that Armenia and Azerbaijan had a war some 2 years ago, so that part of the Eastern Partnership is not working, and Eastern Partnership was pretty much invented as a kind of waiting room for some of the countries, and so this room is not there anymore, because those who wanted to apply, who had the opportunity to apply, applied, and those who wanted to pick these best carrots, meaning the association agreement, DCFTA, visa-free travel, they managed to pick it. So I think that it needs a very deep and comprehensive revision, the Eastern Partnership, and to see whether it worth keep on that way or it needs to be changed. So in a nutshell, again, the expectation here is that the decision should be political. Expectation is that Georgia can get no more than Ukraine, but no less than Ukraine. And the expectation is that it should be, this decision should be accompanied with conditionality that would be measurable, and that would be great leverage for us, for the civil society, to keep the government accountable. This is particularly important considering the elections which Georgia is supposed to have by 2024. So that would be an excellent moment to make this decision. Thank you so much. I'd stop here and would be happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Vano. Thank you for your excellent points, especially at the end, to putting this very precise, your thoughts in this nutshell. Denis, I know you have to leave very soon, so maybe you want to just to round up your thoughts after hearing comments from your colleagues, or to say maybe raising some questions before you leave.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas, for excellent moderation, and to the speakers for, I have completed my questionnaire here. I was taking notes while you were presenting your great ideas. I really appreciate all your thoughts. I would probably have a question for every speaker, so that they could continue maybe developing some of the ideas that they have already introduced. Dorina, I wanted to probably ask you to reflect a little bit more about transparency and inclusiveness, because I have mentioned these are some issues that I have seen while I was monitoring closely what is going on with the questionnaires. Do you really believe that this is important? Because there are voices who are criticizing the idea of having all this openness, because we are Ukraine is at war, we are also facing our crises, so maybe all this inclusiveness, it doesn't make sense right now. So what do you think about that? How you would counter argue if you agree with the counter arguing? Then Sergiy, Ukraine is in a very difficult situation. We know we all talk about already are thinking and developing ideas how to help Ukraine to rebuild. Post-war rebuilding of Ukraine is essential for the development of the country, as well as for the future, European future of Ukraine. So how do you think, what should be the role of domestic actors in the process of rebuilding of Ukraine? Because we know that we speak about big money, and we know that there are some group of interest in Ukraine, like the oligarchs, who are already giving suggestions how this money should be used by the Ukrainian state. How do you see, like, how who should be doing the supervision, and where you see the role of civil society in this regard? And the question for Vano, because he has really criticized in a very constructive way the Eastern Partnership dimension, I would like to ask you, how exactly do you see the evolution of this dimension? Should we revise it in a way to fragment it and have a kind of just something different, or having the same Eastern Partnership dimension, but more focused on civil society, like it was suggested by Sergiy, because his idea is also, in my view, wonderful. I like it, and it could be really picked up by the EU institutions. Thank you all for your great speeches, interventions.
Thanks, Denis. So, Dorina, let's start from you and your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Denis, for the question. Yeah, I know about the debate, and everyone says it a bit differently, you know, potato, potato. But I will say maybe to zoom out of the whole debate, and I think there is a misconception about the definition of transparency and inclusiveness. Sometimes we or different stakeholders are taking it very straightforward, particularly if you're asking me about Moldova. This is my observation as an outsider, that why it needs to be done or it doesn't need to be done, etc., etc. That's why you have the instrument of public diplomacy. And when it comes to public diplomacy, what is the scope of public diplomacy? So you can inform about the process, you can inform about the different members of the task force, you can inform about the timeline, you can educate the public about, and for that you have other, you know, you have universities for that, you have mass media, and not only press releases or these Q&As with the media. There are so many things that can be done these days, and we have, you know, a whole startup hub and a tech campus which can be used. There is a lot of human capital. There you also have diaspora professionals on European affairs, and you can work with them. My question is, why isn't this happening? And then, you know, you are out of this constant critique that you are not being transparent or inclusive. And I will add to that I don't think that all the nitty-gritty details need to be out there. Many of us, even me, I can't know all the I can't have, you know, I'm not a walking dictionary, so to speak, in order to be able to digest all the technicalities of economics or, you know, the agriculture or whatever else is part of the questionnaire. You know, if you know European affairs, you can't know it all. So many of these people will be lost in translation. That's why I see that side of the argument, and that's totally fine. But you can extract, right? Maybe I want to add a little bit on the Eastern Partnership. Your last question, or you didn't address it to me. But I do see value in sectoral cooperation. And I think Moldova, Ukraine, and Georgia have benefited from the bilateral track of Eastern Partnership. What didn't act, and I think it's not only today, but back from 2009, I don't think any of these countries wanted the multilateral track. I don't think we sat down and said, yeah, everyone wanted to be part of the European Union. And then we have, you know, Belarus was always the outsider. Then we have Azerbaijan and Armenia having their own kind of life in the Eastern Partnership. I think what truly, in essence, these countries wanted was the bilateral track. And we did have benefits thinking about the association agreement and where we are today as these three countries. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on the matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Sergiy?
Yes, thank you, Denis, for your very good questions about the huge money and how they should be kept, how the procurement should be kept transparent. Well, on the one hand, there is something we can boast with, and that's the Ukrainian ProZorro system, which is a system of public procurement which ensures transparency. And that's one of the achievements we had long before the start of the invasion in February. And it was more or less success. Many people complained on it, but it indeed managed to limit the level of corruption in public procurement. And I guess that can be one of the tools that should be and must be applied when processing the public procurement needed for the rebuilding of the country. And second point, well, Americans, as they usually do, they give the clue. Recently, the process of passing the bill on the support of Ukraine with $40 billion of the American support was postponed due to the position of one of the senators who said that if there is a body or the monitoring process which will assure the spending of money, he wouldn't object. But unless there is no such body in place, he postpones the whole process. I guess that can be a solution for the Europeans as well. I don't think that anybody would object to creation of the institution which will be empowered enough to monitor the process of the procurement and to monitor the expenditure of the money provided by the donor states and donor organizations. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergey. And Vano, regarding Eastern Partnership future.
Sure. I'll also try to, since we have the question from Mr. Bogdanas, I'll try to answer that question as well. I don't think that the candidate status is given to any political parties. It would not be given to Georgian Dream or United National Movement. This is given to the country and to the population, and to the people of that country. So I think that if not the political parties, the people, the Georgian people society definitely deserves to get this candidate status. And as it was mentioned, I think Sergey was talking about that. That's a long way to go to reach the membership. So let's see how this would evolve and change later. When it comes to the Eastern Partnership, it's really, really hard to give the receipt on how it needs to be changed. But what we see now, I really doubt that it would work again because of these multilateral relations. But I think that would be a good idea to make it more kind of people-to-people level, not at the governmental authority level, but kind of narrowing down to make it at the civil society level. Otherwise, I really doubt that this would work because of this, especially when it comes to the multilateral track of the Eastern Partnership. We have to acknowledge that this is not really working. How can it work when you see two countries with each other in a war with each other? When you see one country with a non-declarative war with another country? So I really doubt this is something workable, and it needs to be acknowledged. And as sooner we acknowledge it, it would be better.
Thank you. As we are already short of time and even ahead of our schedule, I would like just to round up and to thank you very much for our discutants and for Denis for presenting those first thoughts, first thesis, which will be elaborated in much more details on this paper. Yeah, he already started to write it. So, and this record also, I hope, will facilitate to get through all the ideas which circulated here on this discussion. I thank you very much once again for joining you on this webinar, and we will send a link to this record if you want also to just to get on what was discussed here, and we will wait for Denis' final paper, and I just have no doubt that it will be also very inspiring, and we will get much more enough written form on this prospect. So thank you very much. Thank you for your participation, including all participants which were more silent this time, but I saw also some suggestions in written form. So Denis also took notes. Thank you for questions. And I wish you a very, very good day, and let's hope to see the decision on the status of this candidate status very soon, as you all said, sooner than later. And also, I hope this will will just a starting point for a very exciting period leading ahead. So thank you, and bye. Have a good
Thank you.
day.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Bye.
much.
Thank you.
Bye.